You're listening to Read the Damn Book, and this is episode number 22. Welcome to Read the Damn Book podcast. I'm your host, Michelle Glogovac, where I read every book of every author that I interview on this show. This is a spinoff of the Webby-nominated My Simplified Life podcast, where we go behind the scenes. I don't just want to hear about the book. I want to hear about the author, the human being behind the words that we all fall in love with. Here, you're going to hear directly from the authors what their journey through life has been like, their journey through writing their book, and some behind the scenes on every book. So let's get started and read the damn book. Hey friends, welcome back to another episode. I'm your host, Michelle Glogovac, and today we're going behind the scenes of the White House. I am interviewing Gary J. Walters, who is the longest standing usher of the White House. He served from 1970 to 2007 under a number of presidents, and he has documented all of his memories, all kinds of events that have gone on behind the scenes that you and I would not be privy to if it weren't for Gary. It is such an entertaining book. I learned a lot, and I think the biggest takeaway is that the first family is filled with simply people, personalities, family, and that is what you're going to get out of my conversation with Gary. Hi, Gary.
Hello.
I am really excited to talk to you after reading all 290 pages and looking at pictures of you. I think that you have probably lived one of the coolest careers, in my opinion.
Well, I believe I was in a witness to history and getting to know the presidents and their families with my eyes and my ears without having to have a filter of somebody else telling me about them. And the interaction with the presidents and the first families was the joy of me being able to work there for all these years and serve both Republicans and Democrats and try and make the White House a home for them.
I love that. And before we dive in too deep, because I'm sure people are joining going, wait, what? Who are you? Can you take a moment to introduce yourself, please?
Certainly. My name is Gary Walters. I was the chief usher of the White House. I started my career there in 1970 as a uniformed officer of the Secret Service for the first 5.5 years. And then a job opportunity came available to me to join the usher's office. And I applied for that job, and the former chief usher, Rex Scouten, chose me to join the chief usher staff. And I replaced him when he decided to retire 10 years later. He gave my name as a possible chief usher replacement for himself to the president and Mrs. Reagan, and I was appointed chief usher in 1986 and served until I retired in 2007.
And so for those who don't know what an usher is, because I think most people don't know what an usher is, and the title, you even talk about it in the book. They tried to change the title. It doesn't make total sense.
Well, it really came from an English term that revolved around the leader of the house or the person responsible for the house. And that's how the name came about. And the chief usher really has three particular jobs. And the first and foremost is to try and make the White House the home of the president and the first lady and their family and guests during the time that they're in office. It's not an easy place to live. And making it a home for the president is the primary responsibility. Second chore is to be the site of official and ceremonial events of the presidency, both in the House and on the grounds. And thirdly, and not to be forgotten, certainly, the chief usher is responsible for the museum character of the White House and the tours that come through each day, and assisting in any way that's possible with the president and the first lady to enjoy that museum of our American heritage. Every president lived in the White House, with the exception of our first president, George Washington, who selected the site, supervised the early construction of the building, but unfortunately passed away before he could move in. So our first president to live in the White House was John Adams.
And it's amazing to see the history that is included all of that you've seen, but I'm a people person. So I want to talk to authors because I want to hear about them and not just their books. And reading the relationships that you had with these families, the starting off with Nixon on his last day and the way he held his head down and walked away and didn't want anyone to see him. It was very deep to me because that is a side that the public get to see. And I really appreciated that you take a non-political side in all of this. And you do reference in the book that things have changed quite a bit.
They do every 4 or 8 years.
But I think even more so, what we're seeing now, and it seemed like, as you talked about with the Clinton administration coming in and you needed a new admin, and there were certain applications that were given to you that didn't become very apolitical. It was definitely more, people who they knew type of thing. But I felt like reading it, you were there for the family. You were there to do your job. It didn't matter which side of the aisle the president was on. And that's what I loved, getting to know each of these families through your eyes and what you wrote about.
And that was an important part of the job, was to bridge that change in administration from one to the next. And it took a while when you make that change to gain the trust, because the family that's just come into the White House after an election, they're coming into a staff of about 90 people who worked for the previous administration. The people that came and worked at the White House usually ended up being there for an entire career, 30, 40, some 50 years. They were consummate professionals. They knew what they needed to do. And the most important thing that they did was they were able to adapt to the new family. I've always said there's no White House way. It's the way of the president and the first lady set for their home. And that's the important thing, is one of the reasons that I wrote the book was to try and separate the White House from the political end and the families living in the White House. Every day when you turn on the television, the first thing you hear is, "Today the White House said." Well, that's the political aspect. Well, there's a whole lot more that goes on in that 24-hour day. And it's very difficult, as I said, to live in the White House with the family. And we just want to make them as comfortable in their home, because for 4 or 8 years, it is their home where they're going to live, and they have to be comfortable in that home. We need to provide an ability for them to trust us, not to run out to the local news facility and tell stories about what's going on in their private lives. I mean, what we see, what we hear, that belongs to them, not to us.
I love that. I love that it is the everyday life, right down to the cats and dogs. The stories of moving them in as well.
They're part of all of us. We all have them, and they're part of our family.
And you know who's truly impressive is the carpenters as well, creating from desks to headboards to crates for puppies to be born.
At the staff, as I said, tremendously adaptable. And if we can provide something to the president, the first lady, that makes them more comfortable, that's what our duty is on behalf of the American people. We're there to serve the presidency, not a president, but the presidency. And we always looked upon it. And whenever I hired somebody, interviewed them for hiring, I told them that we were representatives of the president from the minute we get up in the morning until the minute that we go to bed at night. And everything we do can be construed as being reflective on the president and the first lady. And we can't bring discomfort to them for our behavior. We need to be forthright and deliver on our promise to them that we will keep their secrets and be quiet about those, and go forward from there and make them comfortable. And that's not an easy task sometimes.
Well, I think you're a very personable person. Reading this book and seeing how you not only got along with everyone, you have a memory of an elephant. Uh, you pay attention to detail. You are very funny. There were a number of times in which I went, "Oh, what did Gary do?" From wearing the masks as President Bush he'd had the stomach flu, to the 500 on the door for President Bush who used the
300.
restroom. 300. Yeah. It was hilarious. And, Mrs. Bush saying, "Oh, you're going to get fired, Gary. You better watch it." But you obviously got along with everybody. And it wasn't just presidents, it was foreign dignitaries, it was performers who came in, like the pianist who needed the blankets underneath the stage, and you were like, "I got this," and then I'm going to remember in however many more years when he comes back. This is who you are.
That's not only myself, but the whole staff. We were there to try and make things comfortable for not only the president and the first lady and their family, but also their guests, because they were the guests of the first family when they were in the White House or on the grounds at an event. And it was our charge to see that we did everything we could to put the president and the first lady at a higher level.
How did you collect all of these memories? Was this something, because you have a lot of detail in this book, a lot. Were you keeping a diary of some sort throughout, or was this a lot of from your memory?
Well, I kept what I always carried around what was many people called a folio, a leather folio. And inside that folio was my daily calendar. And I kept meticulous notes about things that were going on each day, because I had to translate that to the staff, and also in working with the outside entities, in particular the social secretaries. I mean, they're so hardworking of putting the president and the first lady's social agenda together, and it's a collaborative effort, but it takes a lot of detail work. And because of that, I carried this folio with me everywhere I went. And if I laid it down someplace and went somewhere else, the whole staff knew that until I got my folio back, all work stopped, and they needed to get that back to me and find out where I left it.
Similar to Mrs. Reagan and her address book.
That's where I kept my information for the most part. Photographs that the White House photographers provided to me, photographs that the presidents provided or allowed me to take in some cases. All those memories are there. And once you start, and it took me about 1.5 years to write the book, because once I start putting the ideas together that flow from my notes, the memories just flood back. And it was quite a chore, but it was a challenge that I enjoyed immensely.
Was there ever a point in your career, or when you came home at night to your wife and are sharing stories, that you thought, "Wow, this is my job, actually. This is my life"? And I mean, we're talking, you're with Princess Diana and John Travolta. You were there for that dance. You're there for the Queen of England. You're there for all of these huge, incredible moments. Did that ever strike you as, oh wow, how did this happen?
I consider myself tremendously lucky to have been where I was through the years, and deal with the presidents, the first ladies, family members, entertainers, as you stated, and the staff that was there, the guests from around the world that came through the White House. And yeah, I had to pinch myself quite frequently and say, look at the opportunity that you have. There are lots of people. In fact, I tell a story. Back when I was a police officer, I was out at the East Gate one night. I was working the overnight session at midnight, and East Executive Avenue, which is now closed between the Treasury Building and the White House, at that time was open to the public. And about 2:00 in the morning, I saw this gentleman walking back and forth in front of the gate. And finally, I went out and asked him if there was something I could help him with. And he said, well, I'm from the middle of this country, and this is my only time coming to Washington. And I'm only going to be here for a short time. And he said, I was thinking about trying to get a memento. But he said, I know the White House is closed and it's only open for certain times. He said, would you pick a leaf off of that tree and give it to me so I can have that as a memento? So I went over and took a leaf off of a magnolia tree, and I gave it to him. And I said, I hope this is a memory that you'll have. He said, I'll have this forever. And that just gave me a feeling of, I guess, what I was going to see in my years at the White House, that the American people revere the White House in its entirety. Another story that brings to mind, and talking about revering the White House, is I believe that the White House is the image that most people around the world reflect on when they talk about the United States of America. I remember Yeltsin when there was the troubles in the Soviet Union and USSR, and he stood on the top of a tank, and there was a gray building behind him, and he stood there and was talking to the people, and he said to the Russian people, "This is our White House." He didn't say this was our capital or this was and that I think that's the image that the White House has all over the world. And I was privileged enough to be there for a long time and have a part of preserving that history and seeing it, witnessing it, being a part of it.
And speaking of preserving, because we talked about this a little bit before, we've just seen the East Wing be destroyed. And in reading your book, I have found this new appreciation for the way things are curated within the White House, from the furniture to the paintings to the different first ladies who decided, I want to make sure that we bring more art to the White House and let's create this collection. And there's the China collection, and there's so much that it's not just a collection. It gets cataloged, it gets stored, it's refurbished. What is it to see the East Wing be gone? And I know you have a story with the East Wing, so it means even more to you, I feel, than many of us who never got to see it in person. I've been on the outside. I haven't gotten a tour. Our tickets got messed up the time that we were supposed to get them.
Oh,
no. So I did not get to see that. And I think many Americans have not even gotten to see the front of the White House.
Well, everybody that came in came through the East Wing because the tourists entered via the East Gate, and they entered down the colonnade and into the ground floor of the residence from the east side. That's a holdover from when the original East Portico, which is what it was an entranceway into the residence, was built back in 1902 when the West Wing was built. And when the West Wing was built, the entire structure to the west of the residence that was connected directly to the residence, conservatories, greenhouses, a stable, a fire suppression system, all that was torn down to allow the West Wing to be built. And at the same time, the East Wing had the portico, an entranceway, and it wasn't until or to the Second World War when the East Wing was actually enlarged, and everybody's heard about the bunker that was put underneath the East Wing during the Second World War. So those things are now gone, obviously, as you said. But the curators at the White House were meticulous in keeping records of everything that was there. In fact, the White House Historical Association, who published this book, had their photographers there to document everything that was taken out and the different pieces that were there. We had, the executive residence staff had pieces of furniture that were there, and those all obviously were taken out before anything started. So there's always some kind of construction going on at the White House. It started back after the house was built. The The north portico was added, the south portico was added, the west wing was added, and now there's going to be a larger east wing with the ballroom. And one of the things that all the presidents I served talked about was that the White House was relatively limited to the number of people it could have. In the state dining room, we were doing dinners for 130 people, 13 round tables, 10 persons at a table. And the entertainment afterwards would only be able to seat somewhere in the vicinity of 200 people. And when we had large events in the East Room, the maximum number we could put in there was 300. All the presidents that I served, every one of them, wished they had a larger venue at the White House, to the point where we were putting up tents quite frequently in the South grounds, which created a problem of their own. It takes time to put up a tent that's 180 feet long and 100 feet deep. If it's up for any length of time, it kills the grass and we have to resod. The president can't go in and out in the helicopter the way we see him land on the South grounds, because that's where the tent goes up. So each one of the presidents I served had always talked about something larger in the vicinity of the White House. And there were various plans that were floated through the years. At one point, there was even a discussion about the possibility of going south of the White House under the ellipse and putting in a parking facility and a facility that could be used on the White House for press conferences and those kinds of things. So there's a little bit of that. And you alluded to my favorite story about the East Wing, and that was the fact that I met my wife there. She was there in the Nixon Ford administration as the East Wing receptionist and worked in the visitor's office. And we got to talking over the phone. And eventually, actually, after I went into the usher's office in the bicentennial year in 1976, our first date was I brought her over and showed her through the tent, which was over the West Garden, to show her when the Queen was coming.
That's a good first date. I don't know how you kind of went really high there, Gary.
Well, I had my own queen. That's.
Oh. And then you went on to get married. You have a daughter, and
Yes.
it was a cute story when your wife went into labor, and all of a sudden you have basically the entire hospital staff coming to your room because they wanted to know who you were.
Well, and the president and Mrs. Reagan sent a basket of flowers, fruit, and also a teddy bear. And as it came down the hall, it was followed by a contingent of doctors, nurses, aides, and everything. They wanted to know who the president was sending this gift to. So
That's
that was
hilarious.
quite a shock, and one of those times when you have to pinch yourself and say, I'm really living this.
And I love the story of your daughter, Claire, coming to the White House as well, how Mrs. Bush took her and one day and said, I don't have any grandchildren with me. You're going to come read the book. What do you say?
It was the Easter egg roll, and she took her, and I started to follow along, and I thought, where am I going? She can't be any safer. And I spent the next 45 minutes to an hour walking around the grounds and making sure that all the events and activities were going properly, the way they should. And all of a sudden, I heard this cheering and clapping and everything, and I turned around and looked up, and Mrs. Bush had my daughter and her dog, Millie, up on the balcony, the Truman balcony, and they were there waving away at the 20,000 people on the South grounds. And I thought, my goodness, what a picture. And sure enough, one of the White House photographers took a picture.
That's amazing. How incredible for your daughter too, and now your grandchild to get to have all of these memories. It's something that's very touching. I think to be able to say that you've not only worked with all of these individuals, but you got to know them on a very personal level.
That is what was the most pleasing of my years at the White House, to be able to get to know the president, the first lady, their family members, as an individual, and know what they liked, what they didn't like, little surprises that we could do for them from time to time, things that they ask, is this possible? And the answer is yes, it's possible. We'll make it happen.
And there were all kinds of "is this possible?" from swimming pools to the horseshoes to anything was
Yep.
possible, it seems.
It's the president of the United States.
Yes, I'm like that. I wish I had someone who just said, "Yes, of course, Michelle, whatever you want."
Well, there's a way to do that. You get the right number of votes.
You know what's funny is I was thinking about this as I read your book and how the families would move in and the staff members they would bring with them, whether they had someone, a housekeeper or something like that. And I honestly thought to myself, well, you're never going to be in the White House. You don't have a housekeeper you're bringing with you. You're like, yeah, there is no way.
Well,
My kids would be running amok.
You don't have to bring somebody. We'll provide them.
I'll keep that in mind. I'll let my husband know we might be on our way. What would you say if you could pick one moment that it was your absolute favorite or most memorable, that is your most cherished memory in all of these years?
Well, other than being able to have my wife and daughter there at Christmas time, the president at Christmas hosts, and we're the only group of people that he hosts that have their families invited, the resident staff. But the thing that moved me as much as anything in my years there was soon after the signing of the intermediate nuclear arms treaty between President Reagan and President Gorbachev. They walked down the hall from the East Room where they had signed the document back to the state dining room. There was a fireplace in the fire in the fireplace for the first time in my years of ever being in that room. There was no furniture in there. There was the State Department interpreters' booths at one end of the room, cameras. Each gentleman had their own microphones. And they stood there and they talked after the actually years of headbutting between the two governments and nuclear war threatened and all of those concerns for everybody around the world. They stood in front of the fireplace and talked about world peace and what had been accomplished and the new horizon that was developing with these two world superpowers. And I literally was only one of very few people in the room. And I actually felt like the Cold War was thawing at that time. And that was quite a moving experience for me, knowing that not only were these two men there talking, but they were talking to the world and talking about what can be. I think of all the things and the historic moments that I had at the White House, and that was early on in my career as a chief usher. And I thought, boy, this is going to be some ride if I'm going to have these kind of moments from time to time. And in fact, I did.
Amazing. And you detailed quite a bit on 9/11.
Yes.
And I really appreciated your thoughtfulness of thinking ahead because there was supposed to be a major event on the White House lawn and there were tables out and whatnot. And you instructed everyone, no, we got to move this. The helicopter is going to have to land at some point. And when they called to say, okay, we need you to move it, you're like, yeah, I got that. I was 10 steps ahead of you all. But what a day to have been a part of. I remember it. So I would think that you remember it even more.
Well, that was the one time that I actually sat down. I knew the historic context that was going to come from that. And I actually, as the day went along, I did a TikTok moment by moment, and that's what's related in the book. Exactly what took place on that day and what we did. As the White House, as everybody's seen by now, the photographs and video of people being told to leave the White House, to evacuate. And I kept a few gentlemen with me on the South grounds. I knew the president was going to come back from Florida, where he'd been down there talking about what was going to be his initiatives on childhood education. And I knew he was going to come back to the White House. In that short period of time, 9 months that I'd gotten to know George W. Bush, even though he'd been there with his father previously, I knew he was going to come back to the White House and want to talk to the American people from the Oval Office that night. And we just had to clear all that paraphernalia, if you will, the tables, the serving tents, the chairs, the stage. We had to get that out of the way because the alternate landing site for the helicopter, the president's helicopter, is the Pentagon. Well, that wasn't going to happen because of the plane that crashed into the Pentagon. And it was just in my heart. I knew that that was what had to be done. We could not evacuate. We had to stay there and take care of our job. And we did.
It's amazing. It's to reflect on everything that you've done in your career and your life, and then to not only just read it, but then to get to speak to you about it. What a privilege. You've done an incredible job, and to be able to share with all of us this behind the scenes, I mean, it's not something that we may ever get to see again. And, I appreciate at the very end of your book, you do put in a small piece about the 2016, movement of Trump. And it is disappointing to read that nobody was assisting this family in their move when your job has been all along, and this is after you've retired now, almost 10 years after, that you're being called in because nobody's giving the instruction. And to know that your job has always been, you help the family. This isn't, you help the presidency, as you said, not the politics behind it. But to not give forth those instructions, it's like when you leave a job, you got to let the next person know this is how it's done. Whether or not you like it, you leave on good terms. And so it was
the Chief Usher was
disappointing.
always a bridge between the people that were there up until inaugural day at noon when the new president takes the oath of office. And then that changeover time of 5 hours usually for the new president coming in, and not having that ability to have somebody who's been there and done that is something that's a little disturbing, and I think is a detriment to the presidency, to be quite honest.
Because it's a lot for anyone who's listening that doesn't know what goes on Inauguration Day. I mean, you're moving an entire house and bringing in a new house.
One out and one in.
I mean, it's absolutely crazy because it's not just the movement of clothes. It is the movement of beds and changing out drapes and changing out china and you're in layouts and everything. You're completely changing out a home.
And no boxes unopened sitting in the hallways or in the closets. President and the First Lady's clothes are where they want them hung, in the closets. Their favorite foods and snacks are in the kitchen. And the furniture that they want in place is in place. Usually on inaugural night, they have all kinds of family and friends that stay in the White House. When we changed over from the Reagan administration, 2 people, and the Bush administration had, a very large family that they were going to stay that night. We changed over a lot of rooms that had been suites that were a sitting room and a bedroom, and we changed those over to become bedrooms that night. In fact, at one point, Barbara Bush said, we can make do. We'll have some of the kids, the grandchildren, they can bring on sleeping bags and they can sleep on the floor or on the sofa or various things. And I was able to tell Mrs. Barbara Bush, you don't have to worry about that. We'll put the proper amount of beds in. We have some rollaway beds, and we will make sure that none of the children have to sleep on the floor or on the sofas.
And you even brought your crib in.
That's true. My wife and I donated a crib for a baby that needed to be housed in a crib for the night, or for a couple of nights, actually. And it stayed as a part of White House history.
It's incredible. I'm so grateful that you've written all of this history down for each of us, because as Americans, we should know what's going on. I think not just politically in our government, but these behind the scenes, so we get a better understanding.
Yeah, if I can add one thing, this is, and one of the reasons that I ended up writing the book was a continuation of what Mrs. Kennedy started back in 1961. And she wanted to get with some a group of people that put together a guidebook on the White House. And her concept was we want to have a guidebook and a book that tells about the history of the White House, but also about the people who live there. And for a number of years, there hasn't been a talk about the intervening years. And I thought that I could add to that historic piece that Mrs. Kennedy started with and the ongoing efforts of the White House Historical Association to preserve the history of the White House and add to it in some forms, and including their dedication to providing some funds for historical restoration. And so I just wanted to say that I think that I was trying to add to that desire by Mrs. Kennedy.
I believe you have. I'm so grateful
Thank you.
and I can't wait. I'm going to treasure it. I have the book. So I will, I look forward to my children being able to read this and to know this, and they can say, Mom interviewed Gary. She knows him. So to be able to carry on that as well, I appreciate that so much. It's an absolute privilege. So I thank you. I thank you for your service to our country. I thank you for bringing all of these memories and this history to our homes, because that is an absolute treasure. Thank you.
And thank you for the opportunity.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
All right.
I loved getting the behind the scenes. You know, I love all of it, a juicy scoop and to spill the tea. And I felt like that was what Gary's book was all about. And getting to hear firsthand his stories, what this career meant to him, was absolutely incredible. I truly, truly enjoyed the fact that he has shared all of this with us. White House Memories. Please go pick up the book, because it's a part of our American history. It is a part of something that you and I, as Americans, should know about, should read about, and should treasure, because the White House is the people's house. And this is giving us that behind the scenes part of history that we all deserve and that we should all be well aware of. I'm grateful to Gary for sharing his experience, for serving our country the way he has, and for getting to be able to read the damn book.